In America's century-long romance with the automobile, the passion has never burned brighter than with hot rods. Be they immaculate show cars, gritty racers, or somewhere in between, hot rods embody the core values that made this country great. Innovation, competition, improvisation, good looks, fast cars, and the relentless drive to succeed, as told by the legends, old and new, who lived it. This is the incredible true story of an American icon, the hot rod. Hello, I'm Chip Foose. For decades, the 1950s have been glorified as an American golden age. Post-war prosperity gave rise to a vibrant middle class, explosive growth in home and car ownership, and most importantly, the first widespread youth culture in American history. It was the era of soda fountains and Sputnik, of Mickey Mantle and James Dean, of interstate highways and Elvis Presley. And of course, it was the era of the hot rod. Inspired by the example set by hot rodders pushing the envelope at the Bonneville Salt Flats and the drag strips nationwide, which exploits were splashed across the pages of Hot Rod magazine, America's youth fell hard for hot rods.
The first date I ever had with my first wife, we went to a drive-in movie and we went parking. I think she complained that the only time she ever got out of the car was to go to the bathroom. It wasn't enough just to have your parents' car. In fact, it was almost a stigma. You wanted your own car, your own expression, and you wanted people to see it.
Women hanging out with the guys that had the cool cars and all the great tunes on the radio, talking and singing about, cars. And it was like saturated in car culture as a young teen growing up.
The 50s also saw the incredible spread of suburbs, which aided and abetted the growth of car culture. Post-war prosperity led to an explosion in construction and new home ownership. As the middle class dreamed of split-level homes and white picket fences, nowhere was this sentiment more pronounced than Los Angeles, which added to its legacy as the birthplace of hot rodding by playing host to teenage car culture.
The car scene in Southern California was just so happening. At the drive-in, you had Grabowski and Ivo and all those guys with the really cool rides. I watched American Graffiti. I mean, that really, I think, was one of the most accurate movies of all time.
Even before American Graffiti, hot rod movies played their part in spreading hot rod culture.
Not getting away with it.
I think most people take it with a grain of salt. They don't think this is actually what it's like. Some of the street racing scenes are pretty unbelievable, and the guy standing on, on two different cars going down the street, that's pretty unlikely to happen. I think it gave a lot of exposure. You have a replica of Norm Grabowski's T in here, Tommy Ivo's T, which is also here in the museum. And those cars led to the building of thousands of what they were called T-buckets with fiberglass bodies. In the 60s and 70s, there were literally thousands of them based on those two cars.
Educational films also played a role as a means of not only bringing people into the culture, but teaching them how to be safe rodders.
All cars must pass a thorough technical inspection by representatives of the National Hot Rod Association. The association's rules have been responsible for setting and keeping the highest standards of safety, so typical of modern hot rodding.
With seemingly every kid in America dreaming of hot rods, it was only a matter of time before the appearance of the car became just as important as the performance. But two of the finest hot rods ever built predated the 50s customizing craze, and they laid the groundwork for the elemental look of roadsters that continues to this day. The earliest customizers weren't entirely focused on the car's appearance, though that was a major consideration. But form had to follow function, and early builders carefully modified their car's body and chassis to improve performance.
The Doane Spencer Roadster is the oldest hot rod extant. The oldest hot rod started in the 30s. Doane went off to war and finished it in the 40s, and then was preparing it for the Mexican road race in the late 40s, early 50s. This car just says it all to me.
Doane Spencer built his roadster with an eye towards competing in the Carrera Panamericana, the premier road race of its day in the Western Hemisphere. It was also widely considered the most dangerous, with sharp turns, severe elevation changes, and steep drops along the over 2,000-mile course. On average, only a third of the entrants completed the race. And over its 5-year history, 27 people lost their lives. No 32 Roadster had ever been subjected to those kinds of conditions, so Doane Spencer ended up achieving a lot of firsts. Unlike Ack Miller's El Caballo, Doane Spencer had to raise the clearance of his Roadster to avoid road debris, giving birth to the highboy style. And along with the McGee Roadster, which was displayed at the very first Hot Rod show, it's considered one of, if not the finest, 32 Roadsters to ever grace the asphalt.
There are two cars that really define the highboy style. The McGee Roadster, which was done in the 40s, and the Doane Spencer Roadster, which were done in the late 30s and early 40s. There is nothing new in any hot rod today or between then that is not on those two cars. They are the holy grail. They are the genesis of hot rodding. They are it.
In California styling, there's two ways to build a 32 Roadster. One is like Doane Spencer's, where you have you trim the front and rear horns off the car, gas tank goes in the back of the car, and it becomes very narrow in the front. Or you build it like the Bob McGee car, which had front horns, gas tank out the back. And for 60 years, you built one or the other, basically, and nobody really ever got close.
And there's some guys that will never get it right. If they build 10 cars, they're not going to get it right. And there's other guys that just know the first time right off, and that's how you get these iconic cars. And Doane knew how to make it right.
Doane Spencer built the archetypical hot rod. If you look at it, you will be hard-pressed to find a car that's more beautifully balanced in its own way. It's really an extraordinary work of art.
The enduring quality and design of the Doane Spencer Roadster are such that even longtime hot rod insiders can't help but swoon.
I don't think I'm alone in saying that the Doane Spencer Roadster would have to be the #1 hot rod. The stance is incredible, the proportions, the performance, the look. It's such a dashing car that it's head and shoulders above almost anything else.
He was a fabricator of all fabricators. I mean, he was a genius right from the get-go. His 32 Roadster is a classic.
I used to kid people about, once we had restored the Doane Spencer car, I said, I don't know why the rest of us have even wasted our time building a Roadster, because Spencer did it all in 1948. It was perfect.
There are two basic questions you can ask about any great hot rod. How's it run, and how's it look? We've already seen how men like Vic Edelbrock Sr. and Stu Hilborn made their indelible mark on the performance end, but the late 40s and early 50s saw the rise of equally legendary men who were focused purely on the look of the car. In contrast to the rough around the edges look of early Lakesters like Ed Iskandarian's Roadster, 1950s hot rodders were more and more invested in the look of their hop-ups.
Guys that are hot rodders, they just can't leave things alone, so they tweak it a little bit, personalize it. It's about personalizing the car.
George Barris is one of the hot rod world's most recognizable figures. A relentless promoter, he's credited with some of the most famous show and TV cars ever built. Now, well into his 80s, George and his brother Sam were there practically at the beginning. Early issues of Hot Rod magazine carried a small ad for a custom shop in Los Angeles. What appeared to be a misspelling of the word custom was a first hint to the world that the brothers Barris intended to do things a little differently.
George Barris was as much a hot rodder as he was a custom with a K builder. And he just got inspiration from that, got courage from that, and started going off into all these interesting directions, directions that most people wouldn't have thought to take. But because it was George, because it was Southern California, because the movie industry was right here, this whole new custom with a K style was propagated throughout the United States and eventually throughout the world.
One of their first significant cars would also come to be recognized as perhaps the greatest custom car ever built, a chopped Mercury for customer Bob Hirahata.
You know, there's nothing much cooler than an early Barris Merc or Cadillac. We just had Sam's. It was the first chopped Merc ever. That car is as cool today as when he built it. But can you imagine what it would have been like to have taken that out of Barris Customs? I mean, people must have just stopped in the street because they had never seen anything with the roof hammered down like that before. And the fact that he spent 6 months driving that car around, figuring how to do that, that stuff is not taught in schools. You know, it just comes from your gut feeling of knowing why that's right.
They chopped the car and bent the windshield back and found that they could actually have a much lower silhouette. All the windshield pillars slant and some of them curve in, so you can't just take a section out of each corner and drop it down. I mean, you need to pie cut, you need to section, you need to stretch, you need to tug. And the whole idea was you had to be able to get a beer can through the window. Any lower than that was too low, and any higher than that, well, you hadn't done enough.
It was a seminal design that everybody wanted to emulate, or it seemed like everybody wanted to emulate it.
The Hirahata Merc helped popularize so-called lead sleds, heavily chopped and customized early 50s Mercuries that remain popular to this day. It also heralded a move away from the classic shape of the 32 Roadster that had been the template for early customs. George spent the latter part of the decade trying to build the perfect show car. By all accounts, he succeeded with the a la carte, which started life as a Roadster pickup. George brought in top talent to work on the car, including drag racing legend Blackie Jijian, to help build and chrome the chassis, and fellow customizer Dean Jeffries to do the painting and pinstriping.
Well, that car started with just a pickup truck, but he started customizing that from what, well, at that time, there was, I would say, 5 different guys that did the metal work and stuff like that. I was doing all the painting and the pinstriping and all the design stuff, and where you paint all up underneath the fenders and on top exactly the same and come up with some different colors. So from that particular car, it has to be the top car of the year. And that's the one where they would go to the Oakland Roadster show.
The a la carte is one of only a handful of cars to win America's Most Beautiful Roadster, the highest honor a custom car can win, not just once, but twice.
George Barris was probably as much a great promoter and photographer and chronicler of things he and other people were doing as he was a customizer. I think it's fair to say that Sam was really the visionary in terms of doing the metal work and accomplishing it. But George, you know, you look at those old pictures of George in the old days, he's documenting what went on, and those articles appeared in the various magazines. Again, Barris was his own best publicist, and so the word got spread very, very, very quickly.
A little over a year after the a la carte took its first amber at the Oakland Roadster Show, a car show at Disneyland saw the debut of a custom car named Excalibur. You might know it better as the Outlaw. And it was the first big splash made by Ed Big Daddy Roth, a man who was as wild and influential as the cars he built. The Outlaw was a vision in fiberglass that liberally borrowed components and design cues from over 3 decades of American car building. The body was a one-off, all the more remarkable because it was the first time Roth had worked in fiberglass.
He did his first car, the Outlaw, in 1959, and that really set the stage for not everything that followed, but almost everything that followed, because here was a guy who took fiberglass, a material that no one had really used the way he did it before, and he molded this incredibly interesting car in shapes that he could not have achieved with metal.
I hated that car. I mean, as a traditionalist, as someone who could see the intrinsic beauty, I thought, in a 27T, I thought he was smoking something. Where was he going with this? Turns out Roth was more of a visionary than anybody. I mean, he found ways to take the essential shape and substance of these cars and reinterpret it even beyond. And he was using fiberglass.
Because you have to remember that America was a different mindset than Europe was. In Europe, you still had craft workers. You still had people who knew how to use an English wheel, who knew how to hammer out a body panel over a tree stump, who could do these kinds of things. But in America, you really didn't have as many people with those capabilities.
In the early 60s, Roth pushed the envelope even further with the Beatnik Bandit, one of the first customs to be reproduced as a plastic model kit.
And probably you're gonna laugh at the reason that the Beatnik Bandit is my favorite Big Daddy car. It's probably the one that's the least radical because it's got fenders and it's got some shape to it that I really liked. Even though it's got a bubble top and all that, the Beatnik Bandit to me just was, I think personally, it's Roth's best effort. Big Daddy was real. He never smoked, never drank, no drugs, clean, Mormon, but just this lunatic, a natural lunatic.
Roth's eccentric personality was perhaps best expressed by the Ratfink, the counterculture icon that became Roth's signature creation.
You look at the Ratfink today and you see this kind of bristling fur beast with big ears, and in its day, this was Mickey Mouse's evil twin, and it was considered pretty edgy in the 50s and early 60s.
Another Southern California customizer who made a name for himself in the 1950s was Dean Jeffries, a celebrated builder and painter who broke into the industry as a pinstriper. He learned at the feet of perhaps the greatest striper who ever lived, Kenny Howard, known to posterity as Von Dutch.
We were at the very beginning of pinstriping. Cars had to have pinstriping all over, and then it kept getting bigger and bigger and more, from little bit of flames, now big flames and scallops where you blend it all around the car. And it became the rest of my life. I still know how to do good pinstriping.
One of his first high-profile gigs was painting Indy cars in the early 50s.
So from there, I went to Indy every year, and I got to know all these people. So I got to do Indy cars, and through the years, I kept doing more and more. And then one year, I had 22 of the cars that I did all the paint work and design, and that was quite neat. Mobile paid me $200 a car. I can do 2 and 3 cars in one night. I thought it was really super neat to be able to do all that stuff.
After working with George Barris on the a la carte, Dean Jeffries wanted to build his own custom, and he came up with a car that seemed to share more in common with UFOs than roadsters, the acclaimed Manta Ray. Built using the chassis of 2 pre-war Maserati race cars, which today would be worth millions.
Well, I did a little sketch. I still have it on the wall, what I wanted to do. I said, I'll call it Dean Jeffries Manta Ray. I had never built a complete car, no way at all. I did work and stuff, but I never built a complete car. So I started bending 1/4-inch rod and curved it to all the different things that I wanted to make this body look right. So I did it all offset. The whole thing is non-symmetrical design. Then I did the body. It's 82 different pieces of aluminum that I bent around and curved with rollers and stretchers and shrinkers. Then I built the whole thing together. I got all ready to paint it and everything. I just, no pinstriping, no other paint, no nothing else, just in a pearl white. And finished the whole thing and took it to the Oakland Realtor Show. And I won it. I was a very, very, very happy guy. And I took that Manta Ray of mine and used it in the movie with Frankie Avalon and a net full of cello.
The Manta Ray made its screen debut in Bikini Beach, but Jeffries wasn't the only hot rodder building cars for Hollywood. Customizers built many of the iconic TV and movie cars of the 50s and 60s.
I mean, there were a couple of people in Southern California that really had an influence on movies and television. I think Dean Jeffries and George Barris would have to be the top 2. Dean did the Monkey Mobile. He did Black Beauty for the Green Hornet TV series. And then you had George that did the Batmobile. He did the Munster Coach, and between them, dozens and dozens of others. Incredibly talented people whose work was seen all over the world thanks to movies and television.
Especially as a kid growing up in England, I don't know if it's the same in America, probably, but you're sitting in front of that TV every week waiting for Herman to pull up in the Munster Coach. As goofy as the car is, you know, it was all the hot rodding we could get. Just visions of that, you know, they just stay with you forever and a day.
While today, the Green Hornet is remembered primarily for the presence of a young martial artist named Bruce Lee, the show's signature car, the Black Beauty, was no small task for Dean Jeffries.
The car's got to be very unique and different. They don't want it to look like a custom car. So I just got a hold of Chrysler, and they give me one of their big old 1965 Chryslers. So I got the project, started building it, and I changed the whole front end, but I took rid of all the bumpers. I didn't like bumpers. From this day, if you look today, cars don't have no bumpers. It's all built right into the body. Then I put rocket open things where big rockets would come out of the front, and then the headlights would flip different colors for the Green Hornet color, and then cut the roof, and I made it longer. But the original distance is still the same, but it made the car look longer just by stretching that out. When I got all done with it, it turned out to be a nice-looking car. It was quite unique for a four-door, but it did very good. I'm not a movie star guy and don't want to be, never did. I just wanted to be able to build things for motion picture industry because you do things that nobody else does.
Hot rod customizers brought a bold new vision to the culture by taking car design in directions never before seen. They established their hot rod credentials as the most progressive builders in the country. And while they moved well away from the classic roadster design, their efforts spurred a revival of traditional forms that would help push hot rods into a new millennium. I'm Chip Foose. Thanks for watching. Next time on American Icon, the hot rod.
I thought if they like two motors, they'd love four. So there, the showbiz came out in me again.
Everybody expected me to take the money and go to Vegas, and that was going to be it, but I didn't do that, fortunately.
I just want to run a dragster down Hollywood Boulevard. Tony Nancy really revved that dragster up, blew out a few windows at the famous Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, for which Mr. Peterson was responsible.